Hi everyone, today I'm gonna be talking about my 7 personal takeaways from this course. This course helped me analyze how learning theories have always been in my language learning process. I realized that my English classes at school were traditionalist. They were more about the transmission of knowledge, about the students having a passive role. We focused a lot on the textbook and doing grammar exercises. And this method wasn't very effective for me. In addition, I could evidence the affective filter hypothesis. I felt stressed and anxious in my learning context because the children used to make fun of others when we made mistakes. I've realized which learning theories I like the most and what can I do to implement them in my language learning process or how I've done it without being aware of it. For example, the comprehensible input hypothesis. Being exposed to language input is a key to improve my skills in the target language. But I realized that I needed to do a little more than just listening, and that's when the noticing hypothesis comes in. I noticed a huge change when I was listening to something in my target language and I wrote some words down or tried to make a sentence. In other words, what I noticed in the input became intake for learning. I can also talk about how cognitive constructivism has been connected to my language learning process. I've realized that it has been easier for me to learn Italian because of the structures that I already have from French and Spanish. I've also been more critical about education. I've rethought the role of teachers and I've noticed how important is social interaction while learning. I've always been really hard on myself when it comes to language learning. I think that I have to know everything all at once and I find myself comparing to others all the time. But I've realized that we all have different language learning processes. Our contexts are different. We started learning languages at a different age. We had teachers with methods that might have worked or not. And learning theories made me realize how important it is to take into account individual processes. We don't have to stick to one learning theory. We need to take into account the context, the resources, the educational system, the number of students, the age. And what I mean by this is we have to analyze the context and the learners in order to know how we approach teaching and learning. I think it's really important to know how we learn better in order to improve our learning processes. I love the learning styles theory proposed by Cole. I'm a diverger, a concrete experiencer, and a reflective observer, which means that I lean more towards feeling and watching. I was really surprised after learning this because I've always been like that, but I had never thought about it. And I realized how important it is to know ourselves when learning because it can completely change the way we approach this process. We have to stop being afraid of failure because we can insert errors to inform our learning and know which things we have to work on. For example, in this oral presentation that I made for my Italian class, I realized that I made a few mistakes, and knowing why I did that helped me to know what I had to review in order to improve my skills.
Ho fatto molti amici e partecipavo a tutto che potevo.
I noticed that I said praticava, but the correct form in this case is praticavo. That's because the ending of the first person in the perfect of Italian is avo. We can see my L1 interference in this sentence. In Spanish, the ending of the first person is ava for the regular verbs in imperfect. So I was using the same grammatical pattern in my target language as in my mother tongue. Now let's see something that I made for my German class. As you can see, I made a few mistakes in this paragraph, but let's focus on the word underlined. This sentence means she lives in Springfield with her family. Here I should have wrote ira instead of ire. That's because it's a case of dative with possessive pronouns. It's used to mark the indirect object of a sentence and the ending is changed. As you can see in the picture, the ending for the feminine is er. This is not an interference from my L1 because the pronoun su wouldn't have changed in Spanish. Therefore, this is a developmental error because it reflects my gradual discovery of the German system and it can disappear if my ability in the language improves. In the case of Italian, I would recommend myself to talk with others or with myself about my childhood in order to improve my use of the imperfect. I was already aware of this rule, but when speaking spontaneously, my L1 interferes, so I need to practice. And in the case of German, I would recommend myself to write sentences where dative is used in order to consolidate it. I've realized that pedagogy is a very important part of life, and I can find pieces of it when I look around me. So I'm gonna give some examples. One of them is dancing. I practiced ballet for a few years, and I realized that it's an art that has to take into account pedagogy. And I remember Andres, my ballet teacher. The first thing that came into my mind was scaffolding. He had a huge role in supporting my development to get to a more advanced stage. He knew the learning processes of his students, and I always remember that when we made a position in the wrong way, he used to ask us open questions so we could find out what we were doing wrong. And of course, peer scaffolding was also really important. It encouraged us to share perspectives and further thinking. Another everyday example where I can find pedagogy is cooking. I'm not an expert, but I like to cook, and I realized that I use different learning methods depending on how I'm feeling or what I'm cooking. So, for example, if I'm alone, I just throw some ingredients and try something new. If I'm cooking for my family, I follow a recipe. Sometimes I just need some guidance and call my grandmother. And sometimes I can cook something because it's similar to something that I already knew. Okay, so that was it. Thank you for watching.